Have you ever had that sinking feeling when you realize the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are actually counting down the days until they can tear you apart in front of an audience? My name is Maya Chen, and from wherever you're watching this, I need you to stay with me because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, the one where you go to escape the noise of the world. Earbuds in, working on your laptop, minding your own business. And then you hear your brother's voice. Not unusual, right? Except he's not talking to you. He's on the phone, sitting 3 tables behind you, completely unaware that you're there. And the words coming out of his mouth make your blood run cold. We're going to do it at Thanksgiving. Everyone will be there. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It's perfect timing. Mom already has the whole thing planned out. She's going to act all concerned, ask Maya about her little art projects, and then I'll jump in with the intervention. At first you think maybe you misheard. Maybe it's about someone else. But then he says your name again. Maya has been floating around for too long. It's embarrassing. Dad agrees. We need to shake her up, show her what real success looks like. Vanessa even made a slideshow. That's when your hands start shaking so hard you have to close your laptop. Your own family. Planning an ambush. At Thanksgiving dinner. In front of aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. Not because they care. Because they're embarrassed by you. I sat frozen in that coffee shop booth for what felt like an eternity, listening to my brother Derek laugh with someone on the other end of that call. He was laughing. Actually laughing about humiliating me in front of the entire family. The barista called out someone's name for their order. The espresso machine hissed and steamed. People walked past my table completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just tilted on its axis. I wanted to stand up, walk over to his table, and confront him right there. Demand to know what gave him the right to plan an intervention for a life he knew nothing about. But I didn't move. Because here's what I've learned about people like Derek. People who have spent their entire lives being handed gold stars and pats on the back, they don't respond to confrontation from people they don't respect. And my brother had made it crystal clear over the years that he didn't respect me. To him, I was the little sister who never quite figured it out. The one who chose art therapy over law school. The one who rented instead of bought. The one who showed up to family dinners in jeans while he wore designer suits that cost more than my monthly rent. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 6 months ago my business partner Alex and I had been approached by one of the largest educational technology companies in the country. They wanted to acquire LearnPath, the online learning platform we'd built from scratch in my tiny townhouse in the Riverside district. The platform that my mother had once called a cute hobby. The platform that my father had suggested I shut down to get a real job with benefits. That cute hobby had just been valued at $8.5 million. My share of the acquisition was $2.3 million, sitting in my bank account, waiting for the deal to close publicly after the holiday season. But I hadn't told anyone in my family. Not because I was hiding it, but because I'd learned a long time ago that sharing good news with people who are waiting for you to fail is like handing them ammunition and asking them to please be gentle when they shoot. I sat there in Morning Brew coffee shop on Hawthorne Boulevard, watching my brother through the gaps between other customers, watching him gesture animatedly as he described how Uncle James had already prepared a PowerPoint presentation about career pivots after 30. A PowerPoint. About my life. My choices. My supposed failures. They had put together a whole production, assigned roles, coordinated talking points, all designed to break me down in front of everyone who mattered to them. The worst part wasn't even the planned humiliation. It was the certainty in Derek's voice. The absolute confidence that I would just sit there and take it. That I would cry maybe. Apologize for being such a disappointment. Promise to do better. Promise to be more like him. That's what they expected. That's what they'd always expected. I finally closed my laptop, packed up my things with hands that had stopped shaking and started calculating. Because here's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. You learn to move in silence. You learn to build empires while people are busy critiquing your foundation. And you learn that the best response to people who plan your destruction is not defense. It's strategy. I had exactly 7 days until Thanksgiving. 7 days until my family planned to publicly dissect every choice I'd ever made. 7 days to decide whether I was going to show up and play the role they'd written for me, or whether I was going to rewrite the entire script. As I walked out of that coffee shop, past my brother who still hadn't noticed me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cancel. I wasn't going to confront them early. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing I'd heard their plan. I was going to show up to Thanksgiving dinner exactly as expected. Quiet Maya. Struggling Maya. Maya who needed an intervention. And then I was going to detonate every single assumption they'd ever made about me. That night, I sat in my small townhouse surrounded by paperwork that told a very different story than the one my family had written about me. Acquisition documents with signatures and seals. Bank statements showing numbers that would make my father's corporate salary look modest. The press release that was scheduled to go public the week after Thanksgiving, announcing the acquisition and naming me as co-founder and chief creative officer of the merged company. Emails from Dr. Eleanor Wright, the mentor who had believed in me when I was just a graduate student with an idea, congratulating me on the exit, and asking if I was ready for the next phase. Text messages from Sophia, my best friend since college, who knew everything and had been furious when I told her what I'd overheard. She wanted me to skip Thanksgiving entirely, to cut them off, to send a group text exposing their plan, and then block every single one of them. But that wasn't the move. That was reactive. That was letting them set the terms of engagement. I spent that first night after overhearing the plan doing something I rarely allowed myself to do. I let myself feel the full weight of how much it hurt. Not the planned intervention itself, but what it represented. 28 years of being the afterthought. The backup plan. The daughter and sister who was loved conditionally, with an asterisk, with a quiet disappointment that hummed underneath every holiday dinner and birthday celebration. I thought about the pottery piece I'd made for my mother 2 years ago. A beautiful serving bowl that had taken me weeks to perfect, glazed in her favorite colors. I'd found it last Christmas in the basement, shoved behind old paint cans, still in the tissue paper I'd wrapped it in. Meanwhile, Derek's generic gift cards to expensive restaurants were displayed on the refrigerator like acceptance letters to Ivy League schools. I thought about every time my father had asked me when I was going to get serious about my career, while simultaneously bragging to his golf buddies about Derek's latest case, his latest bonus, his latest everything. I thought about Vanessa, my sister-in-law, who had once told me at a family barbecue that she admired people like me who weren't motivated by money. She'd said it like a compliment, but her eyes had flickered to her designer handbag as she said it. And I'd understood the real message. You're not motivated by money because you can't make money. Let her think that. Let all of them think that. Because when people underestimate you, they stop watching closely. They stop noticing when you're building something real. They definitely don't notice when you're about to lap them. I pulled out my phone and started making a list. Not a revenge list, though I won't pretend the thought. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What didn't cross my mind? A strategy list. If I was going to walk into that Thanksgiving dinner knowing what they had planned, I needed to be 3 steps ahead of every single move they were going to make. First, I needed to know exactly what they were planning. I had the overview from Derek's phone call, but I needed details. So I did something I'm not particularly proud of, but desperate times and all that. I texted my cousin Tyler, Linda's son, who had always been friendly to me in that surface-level way that family members are when they don't actively dislike you, but also don't actually know you. I kept it casual, light, just checking in about Thanksgiving plans, asking if he knew what time dinner was, if there was anything I should bring. Tyler, bless his predictable heart, couldn't help himself. He texted back within minutes, "Oh man, it's going to be interesting this year, that's for sure. Your mom has some kind of family meeting planned?" Derek said it's important. I played dumb, asked if it was about Uncle James's health. Some safe excuse that would let Tyler feel like he wasn't spilling secrets while absolutely spilling secrets. Tyler called me instead of texting back. "Maya, listen, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I don't feel great about this whole thing. Your mom and Derek have been planning this intervention thing. They think you need a wake-up call about your career. Uncle James even made a whole presentation. I don't know. Thought you should know it's coming. I made my voice small, surprised, heard in exactly the way they'd expect me to sound. An intervention? About what? Tyler sighed, clearly uncomfortable but also clearly willing to keep talking. They just think you've been struggling, you know? With the art therapy thing not really taking off, still renting, not dating anyone serious. They want to help you figure out your next steps. Mom said your mom is really worried about you. There it was. The full picture. They'd built an entire narrative about my life. A story where I was the struggling artist who couldn't get it together, who needed the successful family members to swoop in and save me from myself. They'd assigned themselves hero roles in a rescue mission I'd never asked for. I thanked Tyler for the heads up, told him I appreciated him looking out for me, and hung up feeling something that surprised me. Not anger anymore. Clarity. Crystal clear, diamond-hard clarity about exactly who these people were and exactly what they thought of me. And more importantly, exactly how wrong they were about to discover they'd been. The next 6 days were a masterclass in preparation. I didn't change my routine. I didn't give any indication that I knew what was coming. I responded to my mother's texts about what dishes I wanted her to make for Thanksgiving, told her I'd bring wine and a dessert, kept everything surface level normal. I had coffee with Sophia, who was practically vibrating with fury on my behalf. You're really going to just walk in there and let them ambush you? She demanded, stirring her latte so aggressively I thought the spoon might break. I smiled, the first real smile I'd managed since overhearing Derek. I'm going to walk in there and let them think they're ambushing me. There's a difference. Sophia studied my face, and then slowly started grinning. Oh my God. You have a plan. What are you going to do? I pulled out my phone and showed her the documents I'd organized. The acquisition paperwork. The press release. The photographs of the loft apartment in the Pearl District that I'd just signed a lease on. A gorgeous industrial chic space with floor-to-ceiling windows, and exposed brick that costs more per month than my parents' mortgage payment. Sophia's eyes went wider and wider as she scrolled through everything. Maya. Oh my God, Maya. When were you going to tell them about all this? I took my phone back and tucked it away. I wasn't. I was just going to live my life and let them keep their opinions. But now? Now they've forced my hand. If they want to have a conversation about my life choices in front of the entire family, then we're going to have that conversation. All of it. Sophia leaned back in her chair, a look of absolute delight spreading across her face. Can I please be there? I would pay money to watch this. I shook my head, already knowing that what I was about to do needed to be just family, just the people who thought they had the right to judge me, sitting in a room with the reality they'd been too busy to notice. But I promise you'll hear about it immediately after. Sophia raised her coffee cup in a toast. To Maya Chen, the quietest storm I've ever known. We clinked cups and I felt something settle in my chest. Not nervousness. Not even anticipation. Just a calm, steady certainty that I was done being small for people who needed me to stay that way so they could feel big. I spent the rest of that week preparing in ways that had nothing to do with Thanksgiving dinner, and everything to do with reclaiming my own narrative. I met with my business partner Alex to finalize the last details of the acquisition announcement. He'd been wanting to publicize earlier, but I'd asked him to wait until after the holidays. Now I asked him to have everything ready to go live the day after Thanksgiving. He didn't ask why I'd changed my mind about the timing. Alex had met my family exactly once, at a dinner 2 years ago, where my father had spent the entire meal explaining to him how real businesses worked, completely oblivious to the fact that Alex had already sold 2 companies before he turned 30. Alex had looked at me after that dinner and said, "You know you don't owe them anything, right? Not explanations, not success, not even your presence." I hadn't understood what he meant at the time, but I understood now. I also did something else that week. I documented everything. Not for social media, not for public consumption, but for myself. I wrote down every memory I could recall of being dismissed, overlooked, or quietly discouraged by my family. The time my mother had introduced me at a party as her daughter, who does art stuff, while introducing Derek as her son, the attorney with the corner office downtown. The time my father had suggested I move back home to save money, even though I was 26 and perfectly capable of paying my rent, because he couldn't conceive of my business actually supporting me. The time Uncle James had pulled me aside at a wedding and given me unsolicited advice about how women my age needed to start thinking seriously about settling down and financial security, as if I was a Victorian maiden waiting for a husband to rescue me from poverty. Every small cut, every casual dismissal, every moment where I'd swallowed my accomplishments to avoid making them uncomfortable. I wrote it all down. Not because I was going to read it to them, but because I needed to remind myself that what was about to happen at Thanksgiving wasn't me being cruel or petty. It was me finally standing up and saying, I see exactly who you are, and I'm done pretending I don't. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of Portland November day where the sky hangs low and heavy, threatening rain that may or may not come. I woke up at 6 in the morning, not because I'd set an alarm, but because my body apparently decided that sleep was optional when you're about to walk into a carefully orchestrated ambush. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling of my townhouse, listening to the rain that had finally started tapping against the windows. In a few hours, I would drive to Lake Oswego, to my parents' house with its perfectly manicured lawn and its perfectly planned intervention. They were expecting struggling Maya. Confused Maya. Maya who needed saving. I got up and made coffee, the good stuff I'd been saving, a single-origin Ethiopian blend that Sophia had brought back from a trip last month. If I was going to walk into battle, I was going to do it properly caffeinated. While the coffee brewed, I laid out my outfit. Nothing fancy, nothing that would signal I knew what was coming. Just dark jeans, a simple cream sweater, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look exactly like they expected me to look. Understated. Unremarkable. The quiet daughter who never quite measured up. I pulled my hair back into a low ponytail, applied just enough makeup to look put together, but not like I was trying too hard, and studied myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed calm, almost eerily so. 7 days ago, I'd been blindsided in a coffee shop. Now I was walking into their trap with my eyes wide open, and a plan they couldn't even begin to imagine. I loaded the wine and dessert into my car, a modest sedan that Derek had once joked was held together by duct tape and prayers. He didn't know that I'd paid cash for it 3 years ago specifically because I didn't want a car payment while I was building the business. He didn't know a lot of things. The drive to Lake Oswego took 30 minutes in light holiday traffic. I spent the entire drive listening to a podcast about negotiation tactics, something I downloaded weeks ago for completely different reasons, but that now felt oddly appropriate. The host was talking about the importance of controlling the frame of a conversation, about how the person who sets the terms of engagement usually wins before anyone even starts talking. My family thought they were setting the terms today. They had no idea I'd already rewritten the entire framework. I pulled up to my parents' house at exactly 11:30, right on time. Not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to be remarked upon. The driveway was already crowded with cars. Derek's black luxury sedan that he leased for an amount that could feed a family of 4 for months. Vanessa's white SUV with the custom wheels. Uncle James's truck. Aunt Linda's sensible hybrid. Everyone was here, all the players in today's performance. All of them probably inside right now doing last-minute prep for the intervention they thought I knew nothing about. I sat in my car for an extra minute, taking deep breaths, centering myself. This was it. The moment where I either let them define me or I defined myself. There wasn't a third option anymore. They'd made sure of that when they decided that humiliating me publicly was an act of love. I grabbed the wine and the bakery box with the pie I'd picked up, fancy enough to look like I'd made an effort, and walked up the stone pathway to the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open and my mother was there, Patricia Chen in all her Thanksgiving glory, wearing an apron over expensive casual clothes, her hair perfectly styled, her smile bright and warm and completely fake. "Maya, sweetheart, you're here, come in, come in." She took the pie box from me and ushered me inside with one hand on my back. That maternal gesture that might have felt comforting if I didn't know what was waiting for me in the dining room. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing and all the traditional scents of a holiday I used to actually enjoy. Now it just smelled like a trap. Everyone was gathered in the living room. Drinks already in hand even though it wasn't even noon yet. Derek stood by the fireplace talking to Uncle James, both of them in sweaters that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Vanessa was perched on the arm of the sofa, scrolling through her phone, her engagement ring catching the light in that way that seemed almost deliberate. Aunt Linda was helping my mother in the kitchen, and my father, Robert Chen, sat in his usual chair reading the newspaper like this was any other Thanksgiving. Tyler gave me a small wave from across the room, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. He knew what was coming. He'd warned me, and now he was going to have to watch it happen. I waved back, kept my expression neutral, pleasant, the same face I'd worn to 100 family gatherings before this one. Derek looked up as I walked in, and his smile was so perfectly calibrated it could have been measured with instruments. Maya, happy Thanksgiving. He crossed the room and pulled me into a hug that felt like a performance. I hugged him back, wondering if he could feel how steady my heartbeat was, how completely unafraid I was of whatever he had planned. Derek pulled back and kept one hand on my shoulder, that big brother gesture that might have meant something if it wasn't a prelude to betrayal. How have you been? Keeping busy? It was such a loaded question. Such a setup. He wanted me to talk about my work, so he could later tear it apart with concern and statistics and helpful suggestions. I smiled. You know me, always working on something. Keeping things interesting. It was vague enough to mean nothing and everything, and I watched Derek's eyes flicker with something that might have been anticipation. Good, he said. We should talk later. There's actually something the family wants to discuss with you. I let surprise cross my face, just a touch, just enough. Oh, is everything okay? My mother appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine. Everything's fine, sweetheart. We just thought it would be nice to have a little family conversation after dinner. Nothing to worry about. She said it so warmly, so kindly, like she was inviting me to a book club and not an execution. I took the wine and sipped it, buying myself a moment to arrange my face into something that looked like mild confusion mixed with trust. Of course, whatever you need. The relief on my mother's face was almost comical. She'd expected me to be suspicious, maybe, or resistant. Instead, I was giving her exactly what she wanted. Compliance. That's my girl, she said, patting my arm before heading back to the kitchen. Derek exchanged a look with my father across the room. A look that said stage 1 complete, target secured. The next few hours unfolded like any Thanksgiving dinner with my family, which is to say everyone talked over each other. The men dominated the conversation, and I sat quietly picking at my food while pretending to listen. Derek held court about a case he'd just won, something involving corporate litigation and 7-figure settlements. Vanessa interjected occasionally with details that made him sound even more impressive, the perfect supportive wife amplifying her husband's accomplishments. Uncle James talked about his consulting business, about the keynote speech he'd given at some conference, about the young professionals he was mentoring. Aunt Linda asked me twice if I was seeing anyone, and both times I deflected with a joke about being married to my work. She laughed, but her eyes said what I knew she was thinking. At your age, you can't afford to be picky. My mother brought out dish after dish, each one perfectly prepared, each one accompanied by a story about where she got the recipe or who had requested it. My father carved the turkey with the precision of a surgeon, doling out portions and pontificating about the stock market, about interest rates, about investment strategies that Derek nodded along to like a student at the feet of a master. I ate my food and watched them all perform. These people who were related to me by blood, but who felt increasingly like strangers. Or maybe not strangers. Maybe I was finally seeing them clearly for the first time. Every word they spoke, every glance they exchanged, was part of a social hierarchy they'd established long ago. Derek at the top, the golden child, the success story. My parents as the proud enablers of that success. Uncle James and Aunt Linda as the chorus, affirming and supporting the family narrative. And me, I was the cautionary tale, the underperformer, the one who needed correction. Tyler caught my eye across the table at one point and mouthed, "Are you okay?" I nodded and smiled, and I meant it. I was more than okay. I was ready. After dinner, after the plates were cleared and the leftovers were wrapped and stored, my mother stood up and clinked her wine glass with a fork. The sound cut through the conversation, and everyone turned to look at her. She had that expression on her face, The one she wore when she was about to make an announcement at a party or organize a family photo. Serious but loving. Concerned but hopeful. Before we have dessert, she began, her voice warm and steady, there's something we'd like to talk about as a family. She looked directly at me. Maya, sweetheart, we've all been talking, and we're concerned about you. We love you so much, and we want to help you get on a better path. Here it was. The intervention. Right on schedule. I set down my wine glass and folded my hands in my lap, the picture of attentive concern. A better path? Derek leaned forward, taking over the conversation like he'd planned. He probably had note cards somewhere. Maya, you're 28 years old. You're talented, you're smart, but you're not living up to your potential. This art therapy thing, it's been years and it's just not sustainable. We think it's time to consider other options. More stable options. I blinked at him. Let myself look a little confused, a little hurt. I have been working. I have clients. I have the online platform. Derek waved a hand dismissively. The platform that makes what, a few $100s a month? Maya, that's not a career. That's a side hustle. You're still renting that place in Riverside. You're driving a car that's almost 10 years old. You don't have retirement savings. You don't have health insurance through an employer. Dad and I have been talking, and there are positions at his firm, entry level, but it's a start. Uncle James stood up, and I realized with a jolt that this was his cue. He walked over to the TV and pulled out a laptop, connecting it with the ease of someone who'd rehearsed this. Within seconds, a PowerPoint presentation appeared on the screen. The title slide read Career Transition Strategies, a Family Investment in Maya's Future. I stared at it, genuinely shocked by the sheer audacity. They'd made a PowerPoint. With graphs. Uncle James clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline. Maya, I've worked with a lot of young professionals who've had to pivot after pursuing passion projects that didn't pan out. There's no shame in it. The shame is in refusing help when it's offered. He clicked again. This slide showed average salaries for different career paths, with art therapy highlighted in red at the bottom and corporate positions highlighted in green at the top. Vanessa chimed in, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. We just want you to have security, Maya. To not have to worry about money all the time. To be able to afford nice things, to travel, to live somewhere safe. She said it like my townhouse was in a war zone instead of a perfectly fine neighborhood that just happened to not be as expensive as their gated community. Aunt Linda added her voice to the chorus. Your mother worries about you constantly, sweetheart. She can't sleep at night thinking about you struggling. We all just want to see you settled, successful, happy. The word successful landed like a slap. As if I wasn't successful. As if success could only be measured by their metrics, their definitions, their narrow understanding of what a good life looked like. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of patriarchal authority. The final word that was meant to end all debate. Maya, this family has resources. We have connections. We're offering you a real opportunity here. But you have to be willing to admit that what you've been doing isn't working. You have to be willing to accept help. The room went silent. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for me to break down maybe, to cry, to apologize for being such a disappointment, to thank them for caring enough to stage this intervention. Tyler was staring at his plate. My mother had tears in her eyes, actual tears, like this was costing her something emotionally to hurt me for my own good. Derek looked satisfied, like a lawyer who'd just delivered a closing argument he knew would win the case. I took a slow breath and let the silence stretch out just long enough to make them uncomfortable. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, calm, almost gentle. Can I ask you all something? My mother nodded eagerly, probably thinking I was about to ask how to accept their help, what the next steps were, when I could start this new better life they'd planned for me. When was the last time any of you asked me about my actual work? Not dismissed it, not made assumptions about it, but actually asked me what I do, how it works, what I've built. The question hung in the air like smoke. Derek frowned. We're asking now. We're trying to understand so we can help you move forward. I shook my head slowly. No, you're not. You're telling me who you think I am based on assumptions you made years ago and never bothered to update. You're offering me solutions to problems I don't have. You're trying to fix a life that isn't broken just because it doesn't look like yours. Uncle James clicked to another slide, clearly trying to get the intervention back on track, but I held up a hand. I'm not done. He froze, and I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, that I was pushing back at all. I stood up from the table, walked over to where I'd left my bag by the door, and pulled out a folder. A simple manila folder that I'd prepared with the care of someone building a legal case. Because that's what this was. Not a defense. A prosecution. I walked back to the table and set the folder down in front of my mother. Inside this folder is documentation of my actual life. The life you're all so concerned about. The life you think needs an intervention. I opened it and pulled out the first document. This is the acquisition agreement for LearnPath, the online learning platform that you, Mom, once called my cute little hobby. The company that acquired us valued the platform at $8.5 million. My share of that acquisition is $2.3 million. The silence that fell over the room was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. My mother's hand went to her throat. My father's face went pale. Derek stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. That's not, he started, but I cut him off. Not what? Not possible? Not real? I pulled out the next document. A bank statement with identifying information redacted, but the balance clearly visible. This is my business account. The one that holds the quarterly earnings from the courses I sell, through my platform. Last quarter alone I made $73,000. Before expenses, yes, but that's more than most entry-level positions at your firm, Dad. I looked at Uncle James, who was still standing by the TV, his PowerPoint suddenly looking like a joke. And this, I said, pulling out a printed email, is from Dr. Eleanor Wright, the head of the psychology department at Reed College, asking me to guest lecture in her graduate program about innovative therapeutic approaches in digital spaces. She's citing my work in her upcoming book. Vanessa was staring at the documents like they might disappear if she looked away. Derek had gone from pale to red, a flush creeping up his neck. Maya, why didn't you tell us? My mother's voice was barely a whisper. I looked at her, really looked at her, and let her see everything I'd been holding back. Because every time I tried to share anything about my work, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned a success, you minimized it. Every time I showed up here, you treated me like a charity case who needed your pity and your guidance. So I stopped sharing. I stopped trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth believing in. I pulled out another document, the lease agreement for my new loft. And this is my new apartment. Pearl District, corner unit, industrial windows, the kind of place Vanessa posts about on Instagram when she's apartment hunting for her friends. I'm moving in next week. I paid the entire year's rent up front because I could. Because while you were all planning this intervention to save me from my failing life, I was building something you couldn't even see because you never bothered to look. Aunt Linda had gone completely silent, her face a mask of shock. Tyler was grinning, actually grinning, like he'd been waiting for this moment, and was thrilled it was finally happening. My father found his voice, though it came out strangled. Maya, this is incredible. Why would you keep this from us? I let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Are you seriously asking me that? After what just happened here? You put together a PowerPoint about my failures. You coordinated an intervention. You were so certain I was struggling that you didn't even consider the possibility that you might be wrong. Derek tried again. If we had known, he started, but I was done listening to excuses. If you had cared enough to ask, you would have known. If you had respected me enough to trust that I knew what I was doing with my own life, you would have known. But you didn't ask. You didn't trust. You just assumed. I gathered up the documents and put them back in the folder, my hands steady. I came here today knowing exactly what you had planned. I heard you, Derek, at Morning Brew last week, on the phone, laughing about how you were going to shake me up. I knew about Uncle James's PowerPoint. I knew about the whole intervention. And I came anyway because I wanted to give you one chance, one single chance, to see me as I actually am instead of who you decided I should be. The betrayal on their faces might have been satisfying if I wasn't so tired. So deeply tired of fighting for scraps of respect from people who should have given it freely. My mother was crying now, real tears, not the performative ones from earlier. Maya, sweetheart, we never meant to hurt you. We were trying to help. I nodded slowly. I know you think that. That's the saddest part. You genuinely believed that humiliating me in front of the family was an act of love. That tearing down everything I'd built was somehow for my own good. Derek's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. So what now? You're just going to throw this in our faces and leave? Feel superior? I walked to the coat closet and pulled out my jacket, slipped it on with calm, deliberate movements. I'm not throwing anything in your faces. I'm simply correcting the record. You wanted to have a family conversation about my life. Well, we had it. Now you know the truth. What you do with that information is up to you. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. My mother stood up, reaching for me. Please don't go. Not like this. We can talk about this. We can, she was searching for words. We can celebrate your success. Have dessert. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Mom, you had years to celebrate my success. Every small win, every client milestone, every course launch. I tried to share those moments with you and you brushed them off. You don't get to celebrate now just because the number is big enough to finally matter to you. And with that, I opened the door and walked out into the cold November evening, leaving behind a table full of people who'd spent years underestimating me, and approximately 30 seconds finally understanding what they'd lost. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway for a full minute before starting the engine, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing slowly through the adrenaline that was finally catching up to me. Through the living room window I could see silhouettes moving, animated gestures, what was probably a very intense conversation happening now that I wasn't there to witness it. Good. Let them talk. Let them process. Let them sit with the discomfort of realizing they'd spent years being wrong about someone they claimed to love. My phone started buzzing before I even pulled out of the driveway. Text messages flooding in. I didn't look at them. I knew what they would say. Variations of wait, come back. Let's talk about this, we didn't mean it that way. All the backpedaling that happens when people realize they've miscalculated badly. I drove away from Lake Oswego, away from that beautiful house with its ugly secrets, and pointed my car toward downtown Portland. Sophia had texted me earlier that morning, before I'd even left for Thanksgiving dinner, with an address and a simple message. When you're done burning it all down, come here. We'll be waiting. The address was for Canard, a restaurant in the Burnside area that Sophia had been wanting to try for months. When I pulled up, I could see through the windows that she'd reserved a large table, and sitting around it were the people who actually knew me. Sophia, of course, practically bouncing in her seat when she saw me walking up. Alex, my business partner, who'd brought his husband James. Dr. Eleanor Wright, my mentor, who'd apparently been in on this plan. And 3 other people from my online course community, students who'd become friends, who'd built their own businesses using the framework I'd taught them. This was my Thanksgiving. These people who'd chosen to show up for me not because we shared DNA, but because we shared values, respect, mutual support. Sophia was out of her seat before I even got through the door, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. Tell me everything, she whispered fiercely. Tell me you destroyed them. I laughed, really laughed for the first time all day, and felt something in my chest unclench. I told them the truth. That's all. Just the plain, documented, undeniable truth. Sophia pulled back and looked at me with eyes that were a little too bright. I'm so proud of you. Alex raised a glass as I sat down. To Maya, who's been trying to tell people she's a badass for years and finally made them listen. Everyone clinked glasses and I felt tears threatening. But these were different tears than the ones I'd been holding back at my parents' house. These were relief. These were belonging. Dr. Wright leaned over and squeezed my hand. I hope you know that what you did today wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Boundaries aren't cruel. Truth isn't cruel. Expecting basic respect isn't cruel. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. One of my course students, a woman named Jennifer who'd left a corporate job to start her own consulting business, spoke up. I know I don't know your family, but I know what it's like when people can't see past their own assumptions. My parents still introduce me as their daughter who used to work at Microsoft. Like everything I've built since then doesn't count because it doesn't fit their definition of success. Heads nodded around the table. Everyone here had a story. Everyone here had been underestimated by someone who should have known better. We ate and talked and laughed, and slowly I felt the weight of the day lifting. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation and judgment and conditional love, but genuine care and celebration, and support that didn't come with strings attached. My phone continued buzzing throughout dinner. I finally looked at it during dessert, scrolling through the messages that had piled up. My mother had texted 7 times, each message more desperate than the last. Please come back. We need to talk about this properly. You have to understand we were just worried about you. Your father wants to apologize. Derek says we got off on the wrong foot. Maya, please. We love you. You know we love you. Derek had sent his own messages, and these were more revealing. I don't understand why you didn't just tell us about the acquisition. We could have celebrated together. This didn't have to turn into a whole thing. You're being dramatic. Call me when you're ready to have an adult conversation about this. I showed that last one to Sophia, who read it and made us sound like a kettle boiling over. An adult conversation? An adult conversation? They literally made a PowerPoint intervention. And he thinks you're being dramatic? Alex read over her shoulder and shook his head. Classic deflection. They got caught being wrong, so now they're reframing your reasonable response as an overreaction. It's manipulation 101. Uncle James had texted too. A long paragraph about how the presentation was meant to be helpful. How he'd spent hours on it because he cared about my future. How he was hurt that I'd taken it the wrong way. Aunt Linda sent a message, saying she hoped I knew everything came from a place of love. Tyler sent the only message that felt genuine. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you before. You were amazing today. I typed back a quick response to Tyler. Thank you for the warning last week. You tried to look out for me and I appreciate it. To everyone else, I sent nothing. Silence was an answer too. Sometimes the most powerful one. By the time dinner was over and we'd split the check and hugged goodbye in the parking lot, it was nearly 9 at night. A full Thanksgiving day, just nothing like the one my family had planned for me. Sophia walked me to my car, her arm linked through mine. So what happens now? Are you going to talk to them eventually? I unlocked my car and leaned against it, looking up at the Portland sky, cloudy and dark with the city lights reflecting off the low clouds. I don't know. Maybe. But not until they actually understand what they did wrong. Not until they can acknowledge it without excuses or justifications. And honestly, I'm not sure they're capable of that. Sophia hugged me one more time. You deserve so much better than what they gave you. Today. You know that, right? I nodded against her shoulder. I'm starting to. I drove home to my townhouse in Riverside, the place I'd be leaving soon for the loft in Pearl District, and felt the strangest sense of peace settle over me. Yes, I'd just blown up my relationship with my family. Yes, tomorrow would probably bring more messages, maybe even people showing up at my door. Yes, this was messy and painful and complicated. But I'd done something I'd never done before. I'd stood up for myself completely, without apologizing, without softening the truth to make them more comfortable. I'd let them see exactly who I was and exactly how wrong they'd been. And I'd walked away when they couldn't handle it. That night I couldn't sleep, but not because of anxiety or regret. Because my mind was racing with possibilities, with the realization that I'd been holding myself back in so many ways, trying to make myself acceptable to people who were determined not to accept me. I got up around midnight and made tea, sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and started writing. Not for them. For me. I wrote about what it feels like to be constantly underestimated by the people who are supposed to champion you. About the specific kind of pain that comes from family rejection. About how success doesn't heal that wound. It just makes it more visible. I wrote for 3 hours straight, and when I finally closed my laptop, I had the rough draft of what would eventually become a course about setting boundaries with family, about redefining success on your own terms, about walking away from relationships that require you to stay small. The next morning, Black Friday, I woke up to 43 new messages. My mother had called 6 times during the night. Derek had sent a series of texts that started conciliatory and ended angry. Maya, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. You embarrassed the entire family yesterday. People are asking questions. You made Mom cry all night. This isn't like you. Call me back. Vanessa had even chimed in with a message that was so passive-aggressive it was almost impressive. I'm sure you're going through something right now, and we all want to support you. But the way you spoke to your family yesterday was really hurtful. I hope you'll consider apologizing when you're feeling more like yourself. I read that one twice, marveling at the audacity. I should apologize. For telling the truth. For not accepting their intervention gracefully. For having the nerve to be successful in ways they hadn't noticed. I was making coffee when someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing on my front step, hands in his pockets, looking older somehow than he had yesterday. I considered not answering. I'd said everything I needed to say. But curiosity won out. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Dad. Maya. He cleared his throat. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe. I'm listening. He looked past me into my townhouse, maybe expecting an invitation that wasn't coming. Your mother is devastated. She didn't sleep last night. She's been crying since you left. I kept my expression neutral. I'm sorry she's upset. But being upset doesn't mean she was right. My father flinched. We weren't trying to hurt you. You have to understand that. We genuinely believed you were struggling. I raised an eyebrow. Based on what evidence? Based on the fact that I don't show off my bank account at family dinners? Based on the fact that my life doesn't look exactly like Derek's? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. You never told us about any of this. The business, the acquisition, the money. How were we supposed to know? Because you could have asked, I said quietly. At any point in the last 5 years, you could have asked me how my work was actually going instead of assuming it was failing. You could have shown interest instead of judgment. You could have trusted me to know what I was doing with my own life. Robert Chen was not a man accustomed to being wrong. And I could see him struggling with it, trying to find an angle that would make this my fault somehow. We're your parents. We're allowed to worry. Worry, yes, I agreed. Coordinate a public humiliation disguised as an intervention, no. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long moment. Derek said you overheard him on the phone. That you knew what we had planned. I nodded. I did. So you came anyway, he said slowly, and you let us go through with it just so you could. What, prove a point? I met his eyes steadily. I came anyway because I wanted to see if you would actually do it. If you really cared so little about my feelings that you'd ambush me in front of the entire family. And you did. So now I know. The words hung between us like a wall. My father looked at me and I could see him seeing me, maybe really seeing me for the first time in years. Maya, I don't know how to fix this. Then don't, I said. Don't try to fix it. Just sit with it. Sit with the fact that you hurt your daughter badly. Sit with the fact that you were wrong about her. Sit with the discomfort of that. And maybe, eventually, actually apologize without trying to justify why you did it. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I am sorry. I nodded. Okay. He waited, like he expected more. When I didn't say anything else, he shifted his weight. So what now? Now I move on with my life, I said simply. With or without you in it. That's up to you. My father looked stricken. You're our daughter. You can't just cut us off. I can do whatever I need to do to protect my peace, I said. You taught me that actions have consequences. Well, these are the consequences. You don't get to treat me like a failure for years, and then act shocked when I stop wanting to be around you. He stood there for another moment, clearly wanting to argue, to negotiate, to find some way to make this okay without actually having to change anything fundamental. But I was done making things easier for him. I was done being the accommodating daughter who absorbed the hurt so everyone else could be comfortable. Finally, he nodded just once and turned to leave. Then he stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm proud of what you've built. Even if I didn't show it. I felt something twist in my chest, but I didn't let it show on my face. Thank you. That means something. But it doesn't erase the rest. He walked back to his car and I closed the door, leaning against it and breathing slowly. That was harder than yesterday somehow. Yesterday I'd been running on adrenaline and righteous anger. Today I was just tired. Tired of having to defend my existence to people who should have been defending me. My phone rang. Derek. I stared at it, watched it ring through to voicemail. He called back immediately. On the third call, I answered. What, Derek? We need to talk about yesterday. No, we don't. Maya, come on. You completely blindsided everyone. You made us all look like idiots. I made you look like idiots? I asked, genuinely incredulous. You did that yourselves when you put together an intervention for someone whose life you knew nothing about. Derek's voice took on that lawyer tone he used when he was trying to win an argument. If you had just communicated better, none of this would have happened. You're always so secretive about your work. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I tried to communicate, Derek. For years. And every single time, you either changed the subject or made a joke about my cute little projects. You didn't want to hear about my work. You wanted to feel superior to me. And now you're mad because you can't anymore. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me a single genuine question about my life? When was the last time you showed interest in anything I was doing that didn't involve comparing it unfavorably to your own career? Silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Derek said, his voice tight. I called to see if you wanted to clear the air. To move past this. But clearly you'd rather hold a grudge. I felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. This isn't a grudge, Derek. This is self-respect. There's a difference. And until you can understand that difference, we don't have anything to talk about. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. This was the right choice. The hard choice, but the right one. The rest of Black Friday passed in a strange quiet. I didn't go shopping. I didn't leave the house. I sat with the discomfort of what I'd done. Let myself feel the full weight of it. Because yes, I'd been right. Yes, they'd been wrong. But that didn't make it painless to essentially lose my family in one afternoon. I thought about all the Thanksgivings before this one. All the times I'd swallowed my hurt and showed up anyway, because that's what you did. You endured. You made peace. You prioritized family unity over your own dignity. And look where that had gotten me. To a dining room table with a PowerPoint presentation about my failures. By evening, the messages had slowed to a trickle. Aunt Linda sent one final plea. Maya, please reconsider shutting everyone out. Family is forever. We can work through this. I stared at that message for a long time before typing back. Family is only forever if it's built on respect. Right now, we don't have that foundation. So no, we can't work through this until we have something real to build on. It was the only response I sent to anyone that day besides Tyler. And then I did something radical. I muted the family group chat. I didn't leave it, not yet, but I muted it so I wouldn't see the messages pile up. I took control of my own peace. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It took me a minute to realize it was Vanessa, texting from a different phone because I'd apparently been blocked or she'd gotten a new number. The message was long, a whole paragraph about how I'd humiliated Derek in front of his family, how he'd worked so hard to build his reputation, and I'd undermined it with my little stunt. How I was being selfish and cruel. I read it twice, then blocked that number too. I wasn't going to defend myself to Derek's wife. I wasn't going to explain or justify or engage. I was simply going to protect my boundaries and let them be angry about it. Sophia called around 8. I answered on the second ring. How are you holding up? Tired, I admitted. But okay. Good tired or bad tired? Good tired. Like I finally put down something heavy I'd been carrying for too long. Sophia was quiet for a moment. You know they're going to keep trying, right? They're going to push and prod and try to make you feel guilty until you give in. I know. But I'm not giving in. Not this time. Good, Sophia said fiercely. Because you deserve so much better than people who only value you when you prove yourself in ways they understand. We talked for another hour, about nothing and everything. And when I finally hung up, I felt less alone than I had all day. I spent the weekend preparing for my move to the Pearl District loft, boxing up books and clothes, sorting through belongings, deciding what came with me to this next chapter, and what got left behind. It felt symbolic, this physical sorting. I was doing the same thing with relationships, deciding what was worth carrying forward, and what needed to be released. On Sunday morning, I drove to the loft to take measurements for furniture, and standing in that empty space with its huge windows and exposed brick, I felt something shift. This was mine. Not my parents' vision of what I should have. Not Derek's metric of success. Mine. Built with my own work, my own choices, my own timeline. I took a photo of the empty loft, the morning light streaming through the windows, and posted it to my Instagram with a simple caption. New chapter. New space. Same me, just louder. Within an hour, it had hundreds of likes and comments. People I'd worked with, students from my courses, friends who knew the backstory and friends who didn't. The support was overwhelming. And notably absent from the likes and comments? Anyone from my family. They were watching, I was sure. But they weren't engaging. Good. Let them watch from a distance while I built a life that had nothing to do with their approval. Monday morning, the press release went out. LearnPath acquired by edtech giant for $8.5 million, co-founder Maya Chen to lead creative integration. My phone exploded with notifications, but this time they were from journalists, from colleagues, from people in my industry. My LinkedIn blew up with connection requests and congratulations. And finally, 3 hours after the press release, I got a text from my mother. I saw the news. I don't know what to say, except I'm sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't see this. We should have known. We should have trusted you. I read it and felt nothing. No vindication, no satisfaction. Just a distant sadness for what could have been if they'd chosen differently years ago. I didn't respond to my mother's text. Not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. Sorry wasn't enough. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Later that day, I got an email from Derek's work account, formal and stiff. Maya, I want to acknowledge that I made incorrect assumptions about your professional situation. I clearly underestimated your capabilities and I apologize for that. I would like to discuss how we might move forward as a family. It was the most Derek apology possible. Acknowledging facts without actually engaging with feelings. Apologizing for being wrong without apologizing for being cruel. I archived the email without responding. What I did instead was call Dr. Wright and ask if her offer to guest lecture was still open. She said yes immediately, enthusiastically, and we spent an hour on the phone planning the curriculum. I poured myself into work, into the course I was developing about boundaries, into the integration meetings with the acquiring company. I filled my life with purpose and people who respected me, and slowly, the space where my family used to be stopped aching quite so much. It wasn't that I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of them. The family they could have been if they'd chosen love over judgment. But I didn't miss the reality of them. The constant criticism. The casual dismissal. The assumption that I needed saving from myself. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I was fully moved into the loft. Sophia helped me unpack, and we christened the space with wine and takeout, sitting on the floor because my furniture hadn't been delivered yet. This place is incredible, Sophia said, looking around at the high ceilings and industrial fixtures. You did it, Maya. You really did it. I clinked my wine glass against hers. We did it. All of us who refused to stay small. She smiled. Have you heard from them at all? A few texts. A few emails. Nothing that suggests they actually get it. Sophia studied my face. Do you think they ever will? I considered the question seriously. Maybe. People can change. But I'm not going to wait around hoping for it. I'm going to live my life, and if they want to be part of it, they know what they need to do. And that's exactly what I did. I lived my life loudly, visibly, unapologetically. I guest lectured at Reed College, and the students gave me a standing ovation. I launched my Boundaries course and it sold out in 48 hours. I went on a podcast about women in tech, and talked about being underestimated, and how I'd turned it into fuel. I showed up as myself, fully and completely, and discovered that the world had room for that version of me even if my family hadn't. The version that was successful and soft, ambitious and artistic, professional and still learning. All of it. All of me. Christmas came faster than I expected, sliding into view while I was busy building a life that had nothing to do with family obligations or forced gatherings. Sophia asked me in early December what my plans were for the holidays, and I realized with a jolt that I hadn't even thought about it. For the first time in 28 years, I wasn't automatically penciling in Christmas at my parents' house. The invitation had come, of course. A carefully worded email from my mother 3 weeks before Christmas. We would love to have you join us for Christmas Eve dinner. I know things have been difficult since Thanksgiving, but the holidays are a time for family. We miss you. Please consider coming. It was signed Mom and Dad, like a unified front, though I suspected my mother had written it alone. I sat with that invitation for days, turning it over in my mind like a stone. Part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to prioritize family harmony above everything else, wanted to say yes. Wanted to show up and pretend everything was fine, because that's what you did at Christmas. You forgave. You moved on. You acted like hurt feelings were just water under the bridge. But I'd spent the last month learning to listen to a different part of myself, the part that knew forgiveness without accountability was just enabling. So I wrote back, careful and clear. Thank you for the invitation. I'm not ready to spend Christmas together this year. I need more time, and I need to see real understanding of why what happened at Thanksgiving was harmful, not just apologies for the outcome. I hope you can respect that boundary. My mother called within an hour of me sending that email. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I sent a text. I meant what I said in my email. I'm not ready to talk yet. Please respect that. The response came fast, typed with the urgency of someone who wasn't used to being told no by their own daughter. Maya, this is your family. You can't just cut us out over one misunderstanding. We said we were sorry. What more do you want from us? I stared at that text for a long time. What more did I want? I wanted them to understand that planning to humiliate me wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. I wanted them to sit with their own discomfort instead of rushing to make me responsible for soothing it. I wanted them to prove they actually saw me as a capable adult instead of a project that needed fixing. But I didn't type any of that. Instead, I wrote, I want you to understand why I'm hurt without me having to explain it to you like your children. I want you to do the work of actually reflecting on your behavior, instead of expecting me to accept a surface-level apology and move on. When you're ready to have that conversation, I'll be here. Until then, please give me space. I turned off my phone after sending that message. Just powered it completely down and left it in a drawer. I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remove yourself from a conversation that's going nowhere. Let them sit with the silence. Let them wonder. Let them feel a fraction of the isolation they'd made me feel for years. Instead of spending Christmas Eve at my parents' house, I spent it at Sophia's apartment with a group of friends who'd become my chosen family. We cooked together, drank too much wine, exchanged gifts that were thoughtful instead of expensive, and played board games until midnight. At one point, Sophia pulled me aside into her kitchen while everyone else was arguing about Monopoly rules in the living room. Are you okay? Really okay? I leaned against her counter and considered the question honestly. I'm sad, I admitted. I'm sad that it came to this. I'm sad that they couldn't just love me as I am. But I'm also relieved. And I think the relief is winning. Sophia hugged me, fierce and tight. You're allowed to be both. You're allowed to grieve what you wish they'd been while also celebrating the freedom of not having to try anymore. Christmas morning I woke up in my loft, sunlight streaming through the massive windows, and felt a peace I hadn't expected. No anxiety about what passive-aggressive comment would be made at breakfast. No walking on eggshells trying to avoid topics that would turn into criticism. No performing gratitude for gifts given with one hand while judgment was delivered with the other. Just quiet. Just space. Just me and my own life spread out before me like a blank page. I made coffee and sat by the window watching the city wake up, and my phone, which I'd finally turned back on, buzzed with a message. Not from my family. From Dr. Wright. Merry Christmas, Maya. I hope you're having a peaceful day. I wanted you to know that the guest lecture you gave last week is still generating discussion among my students. Several have asked if you'd consider doing a follow-up session in the spring. You're making an impact that reaches far beyond what you probably realize. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us. I read that message 3 times, feeling something warm and solid settle in my chest. This was what mattered. Not whether my family finally understood my worth, but whether I was using my gifts to make a difference in the world. Whether I was showing up fully as myself and creating value that resonated with people who could actually see it. The answer to both of those questions was yes. And that had to be enough. It was enough. Later that afternoon, I did get a message from my family. Not my parents, not Derek. Tyler. Hey Maya, Merry Christmas. Things are weird here without you. Derek and your dad got into it about the Thanksgiving thing. Your mom's been crying on and off all day. I know it's not my place, but I think they're starting to actually get it. How badly they messed up. Anyway, I hope you're having a good day. You deserve to. I smiled at my phone. Tyler had always been the most emotionally intelligent person in that family, which wasn't saying much but still meant something. I wrote back, Merry Christmas, Tyler. Thank you for the update. I hope you're taking care of yourself in the middle of all that. Tyler responded immediately. I told them at dinner yesterday that what they did to you was messed up, that the intervention was cruel, and the way they dismissed your work for years was worse. Derek told me to stay out of it. Your dad looked like he'd been slapped. Your mom just cried harder. I don't know if they'll ever actually apologize the right way, but at least now they know not everyone thinks you're the problem. I felt a rush of affection for my cousin. This person who barely knew me but was willing to speak up anyway. That means more than you know. Thank you for saying something. The week between Christmas and New Year's was strange and liminal. That space where time feels suspended and everyone's just waiting for the calendar to flip, so they can start fresh. I used that time to work on the Boundaries course, pouring everything I'd learned in the last month into content that might help other people navigate similar situations. I wrote about the difference between guilt and responsibility, about how families can love you and still harm you, about why walking away is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them. The course modules came together with a clarity I'd never experienced before, like I was writing from a place of hard-won wisdom instead of theory. Every word was earned. Every lesson was paid for with my own pain and my own growth. On New Year's Eve, I got an unexpected visitor. I was getting ready to head to a party when someone knocked on my loft door. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing there, holding a small wrapped box. My first instinct was to not answer. I'd asked for space. He was violating that boundary. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders curved inward, made me open the door. I didn't invite him in, just stood in the doorway the same way I had at my townhouse a month ago. Dad. Maya. He held out the box. I know you asked for space, and I'm not trying to push, but I wanted to give you this before the year ended. I need you to have it. I took the box, surprisingly heavy for its size, and opened it slowly. Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before. It was me at maybe 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in our old house, completely absorbed in painting something on a large sheet of paper. The concentration on my young face was absolute, my tongue poking out slightly the way it still did when I was focused on detail work. I looked up at my father, confused. I found it last week when your mother was going through old photos, he said quietly. She was making an album to give you, thinking it might, I don't know, remind you of good times. But when I saw this picture, I realized something. I stared at the photo, at that little girl who already knew what she loved, who was already creating, already focused, already herself. Your mother wanted to include it with a caption about how creative you were as a child, my father continued. Past tense. Like that creativity was something you grew out of. But looking at this photo, Maya, you're doing the exact same thing now that you were doing then. You found what you loved and you've been doing it your whole life. We stopped seeing it. We stopped valuing it because it didn't look like what we expected success to look like. His voice cracked slightly. I failed you. Not just at Thanksgiving. For years. I failed to see my own daughter clearly because I was too busy comparing you to some imaginary standard that had nothing to do with who you actually are. I held the frame carefully, feeling the weight of it, the weight of what he was trying to say. This is a start, I said finally. This is closer to an actual apology than anything I've gotten so far. But Dad, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry because you didn't know about the acquisition. I'm angry because you never asked. For years, you never asked me about my work with genuine curiosity. You asked so you could offer advice I didn't need or express concern I didn't want. You asked from a place of already knowing I was failing. That's what hurt. My father nodded slowly, and I saw his eyes were wet. I know. I'm starting to understand that. I'm starting to understand a lot of things I should have understood a long time ago. We stood there in the doorway for another minute, the sounds of the city on New Year's Eve filtering up from the street below. People already celebrating even though midnight was hours away. Thank you for this, I said, holding up the photo. It means something. Will you? He hesitated. Will you think about coming to dinner sometime? Not a holiday, not a big gathering. Just dinner. You and me and your mother. So we can talk. Really talk. I'll think about it, I said honestly. But I'm not making any promises. And if I do come, you need to be ready to hear things that might be uncomfortable. To sit with your own guilt without making me responsible for managing it. He nodded. I understand. Or I'm trying to. I'm going to keep trying. After he left, I sat on my couch holding that photograph for a long time. That little girl had no idea what was ahead of her. The years of being dismissed, the constant comparisons to her brother, the slow erosion of confidence that comes from people you love treating your passion like a phase. But she also had no idea how strong she would become. How she'd learn to build her dreams in the margins of other people's doubt. How she'd eventually find her voice loud enough to demand respect from people who'd never planned to give it. I set the photo on my mantle, the first personal item I displayed in the new loft, and something about seeing it there felt right. A reminder. Not of where I came from, but of who I'd always been underneath all the noise. The party that night was exactly what I needed. Alex and his husband had rented out a small gallery space, and it was full of people from our industry, artists and entrepreneurs and people who'd built unusual careers that didn't fit into traditional boxes. At midnight, when everyone was counting down and cheering and kissing and celebrating, I stood by a window looking out at Portland spreading below me in all directions. And I made myself a promise. This year, I was going to stop waiting for permission. Permission to be successful. Permission to be angry. Permission to protect my peace. I was going to live as loudly and fully as I wanted, and anyone who couldn't handle that was welcome to exit my life with my blessing. January brought a rhythm I hadn't expected. Work was intense but satisfying. The integration with the acquiring company was complex, requiring me to travel to San Francisco twice for meetings, and I discovered I loved the challenge of it. I loved being in rooms with people who took me seriously, who valued my expertise, who never once asked me when I was going to get a real job. The Boundaries course launched in mid-January and sold out so fast I had to create a waitlist. The testimonials that started coming in were overwhelming. People sharing their own stories of family dysfunction, of being underestimated, of finally finding the courage to walk away from relationships that required them to stay small. I'm teaching what I learned. One woman wrote, my parents planned an intervention for my perfectly successful life, and I showed them exactly how wrong they were. Thank you for giving me the framework to do it without guilt. I did eventually have that dinner with my parents. 6 weeks after New Year's, on a cold February evening, I drove to a restaurant halfway between downtown and Lake Oswego, neutral territory. They were already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen them look before. My mother stood when she saw me, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to hug me. I let her, briefly, and shook my father's hand before sitting down. The first few minutes were awkward, filled with comments about the menu and the weather and other safe topics. Then my mother set down her menu and looked at me directly. Maya, I've been seeing a therapist. Since December. She suggested I write you a letter, but I wanted to say this in person. She took a breath. I've spent the last 2 months trying to understand why I was so blind to your success. Why I was so ready to believe you were struggling when all the evidence suggested otherwise. I waited, not helping her, letting her find her own words. And what I've realized, she continued, her voice shaking slightly, is that I needed you to need me. When you were younger, you did need me. And I liked that. I liked being the person you came to for help. And when you grew up and stopped needing me, when you built this whole successful life without my guidance, I think, she paused, I think I resented it. So I convinced myself you were failing because that was easier than accepting that you'd outgrown needing your mother. Tears were sliding down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. I'm so sorry, Maya. I'm sorry I chose my own ego over celebrating you. I'm sorry I let Derek dominate every conversation while dismissing your accomplishments. I'm sorry I planned that intervention instead of just asking you how you were really doing. I'm sorry for all of it. It was the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me. I felt my own throat getting tight, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you for saying that. That's what I needed to hear. Not that you were sorry for how things turned out, but that you understand why your actions were harmful in the first place. My father cleared his throat. I've been doing a lot of thinking too. About how I parented you and Derek differently. How I was harder on you, more critical because he struggled with the words. Because I think I was threatened by you. By your creativity, your independence. You were never easy to control or predict, and I didn't know what to do with that. So I criticized it. Tried to shape you into something more manageable. And I robbed both of us of a real relationship in the process. We talked for 3 hours that night. Really talked. Maybe for the first time ever. They asked me questions about my work, actual curious questions, and listened to the answers without offering unsolicited advice. I told them about the course I was developing, about the guest lectures, about the integration work with the acquiring company. I also told them how much they'd hurt me over the years, specific examples, specific moments, and they listened without defending themselves. It wasn't comfortable. There were long silences. There were more tears from my mother and a few from my father. But it was real in a way our relationship had never been real before. At the end of the night, my mother asked if I would consider coming to Sunday dinner sometime. No Derek and Vanessa, she added quickly. No extended family. Just the 3 of us. Small steps. I'll think about it, I said. And I meant it. Not as an automatic yes, but as a genuine consideration. Because I could see they were trying. Really trying, not just performing remorse but actually sitting with their own failures and attempting to change. That didn't erase the past. It didn't make everything okay. But it was something. It was a foundation we could maybe, eventually, build on. Over the next few months, I did start going to occasional Sunday dinners. Once a month at first, then every few weeks. They were different than family dinners used to be. Smaller, quieter, more honest. My mother asked about my work, and actually remembered what I told her from one conversation to the next. My father stopped offering advice and started just listening. Slowly, carefully, we began building something new. Not the relationship we'd had before, but something more authentic, more balanced, more mutual. Derek was a different story. He sent me an email in March, a long formal thing about how he'd been reflecting on our relationship, and realized he'd been competitive with me in unhealthy ways. He apologized for the intervention and for years of dismissing my work. But when I suggested we meet for coffee to talk about it, he said he was too busy with a new case, maybe next month. Next month became the month after. Eventually I stopped asking. Some relationships, I was learning, couldn't be repaired because one party wasn't willing to put in the work. And that was okay. I could have a relationship with my parents without having one with my brother. I could set those boundaries independently. The spring brought unexpected opportunities. A publisher reached out about turning my boundaries course into a book. A venture capital firm asked me to consult on their portfolio company's learning and development strategies. I was invited to speak at a conference about women in tech, sharing a stage with entrepreneurs I'd admired for years. My life was full in ways it had never been when I was trying to please my family, trying to fit into their narrow definition of success. Now I was defining success for myself, and it turned out I was pretty good at it. Sophia and I took a trip to Japan in April, something I'd always wanted to do but had never made time for. Standing in a temple in Kyoto, watching cherry blossoms fall like pink snow, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd thought about the Thanksgiving intervention. Not because I'd forgiven and forgotten, but because it had stopped being the central event of my life. It was just something that happened, something that catalyzed a necessary change, but not the thing that defined me. In May, I got a text from Tyler. He was getting married, and he wanted me at the wedding. Derek's going to be there, obviously as a groomsman, but I really want you there too. Your family, and I want you to celebrate with me. I said yes without hesitation. I wasn't going to let Derek's presence determine where I did or didn't go. I'd reclaimed my space in the family, or at least the parts of the family that mattered to me. The wedding was beautiful. held at a vineyard outside Portland on a warm June afternoon. I brought Sophia as my plus one, and we sat in the back during the ceremony, away from where my parents and Derek sat in the front rows. At the reception, my mother introduced me to her friends not as her daughter who does art stuff, but as her daughter who runs a successful educational technology company. My father showed people pictures on his phone of the article that had been written about me in a business magazine. Derek and I maintained a polite distance all night, the kind of careful navigation you do at events where you're both present, but not actually together. We said hello, we made small talk about the wedding, and then we orbited to different parts of the reception. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just neutral, which felt like the best we were going to get. During the toasts, Tyler surprised me by raising his glass and saying, "To family, both the one you're born into and the one you choose. To having the courage to be yourself even when it's hard. And to my cousin Maya, who taught me that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary." The whole tent turned to look at me, and I raised my glass back to him, blinking away unexpected tears. After the wedding, things settled into a new normal. I saw my parents regularly but not constantly. I kept building my career, launching new courses, taking on interesting consulting projects, speaking at events. I dated someone for a few months, an architect I met through work, and when it ended amicably we stayed friends. I traveled, I created, I lived exactly the life I wanted without apologizing for any of it. And slowly, the wound that had been ripped open at Thanksgiving dinner healed. Not perfectly. There was scar tissue. There were moments when something would remind me of how much they'd hurt me, and I'd feel it fresh all over again. But the day-to-day pain faded, replaced by something more like acceptance. A year after the intervention, Thanksgiving rolled around again. My mother called in early November to ask what my plans were. "I'm actually going to be traveling," I told her honestly. "Sophia and I are going to Mexico for the week. We're doing Friendsgiving on the beach this year." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, well, that sounds lovely. Will you be back for Christmas?" "Probably," I said. "I'll let you know closer to the date." Another pause. "Maya, I want you to know that last Thanksgiving, that whole disaster, it was the worst thing I've ever done to you. But it was also the wake-up call I needed. We needed. This year has been hard, but it's also been the most honest our family has been in decades. And that's because you had the courage to tell us the truth even when it cost you." I felt something settle in my chest, something that had been tense for a year finally relaxing. "Thank you, Mom. That means a lot." On Thanksgiving Day, I sat on a beach in Tulum with Sophia and 4 other friends, people who'd become my chosen family over the years. We cooked together in our rented house, we swam in the ocean, we watched the sunset and talked about what we were grateful for. When it was my turn, I said, "I'm grateful for the courage to walk away from things that hurt me, even when they're supposed to be permanent. I'm grateful for friends who became family. And I'm grateful for the version of myself I discovered when I stopped trying to be who other people needed me to be." We raised our glasses to that, to growth and boundaries and the families we build for ourselves. And I meant every word. The photo my father gave me still sits on my mantle in the Pearl District loft. That 7-year-old girl, completely absorbed in her art, unaware of everything ahead of her. Sometimes I look at her and feel protective, wishing I could tell her that the road is going to be hard but she's going to make it. That she's going to build something beautiful not despite being underestimated, but because of it. That she's going to learn her worth doesn't come from other people's recognition. It comes from knowing herself, trusting herself, choosing herself even when it's terrifying. Other times I look at that photo and realize she already knew all of that. She was already choosing herself at 7, painting what she loved regardless of whether anyone understood it. I didn't lose that girl at some point. I just forgot her for a while. And last Thanksgiving, standing in my parents' dining room with a folder full of proof I didn't need but finally gave them anyway, I remembered. I remembered who I'd always been. And I decided to be her loudly, completely, unapologetically from that moment forward. The bracelet that started this whole story, the one in the original tale, doesn't exist in mine. But I have my own symbol. It's a keychain, simple brushed metal, that came with my loft apartment. It says nothing, has no engraving, no special meaning to anyone but me. But every time I unlock my door, Every time I come home to this space I built with my own success, my own choices, my own timeline, I touch that keychain and remember. I remember that I don't need anyone's permission to exist fully. I remember that family can be repaired but only if both sides are willing to do the work. I remember that walking away from people who diminish you isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation. And I remember that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living so fully and completely as yourself that you forget you ever needed to prove anything to anyone. That's my story. That's what happened when I overheard my family planning to humiliate me, and decided to show up anyway. Armed with truth and boundaries and a lifetime of being underestimated. They thought they were staging an intervention. Instead, they gave me permission to intervene in my own life, to rewrite the script, to choose myself first for once. And that choice changed everything. The summer after that first post-intervention Thanksgiving brought changes I hadn't anticipated. The book based on my boundaries course was published in June, and somehow, against all publishing odds, it caught fire. Not massive bestseller fire, but the kind of steady burn that meant real people were finding it, reading it, and sharing it with others who needed it. I started getting messages from readers, hundreds of them. People telling me their own stories of family dysfunction, and the courage they'd found to finally set boundaries. One message in particular stuck with me. It was from a woman named Stephanie who wrote that she'd been planning to attend her sister's wedding even though her sister had spent years belittling her career choices. After reading my book, she'd decided not to go. And instead of the guilt she'd expected to feel, she felt free. Your story gave me permission to stop setting myself on fire to keep other people warm, she wrote. I cried reading that because I knew exactly what she meant. The book's success led to more speaking invitations, and I found myself traveling constantly that summer. Tech conferences, women's leadership retreats, university commencement speeches. Each time I told some version of my story, the Thanksgiving intervention, the years of being dismissed, the decision to finally choose myself, I watched faces in the audience light up with recognition. This wasn't just my story. It was the story of anyone who'd ever been underestimated by people who were supposed to champion them. After one particularly emotional keynote in Boston, a young woman approached me during the book signing. She couldn't have been more than 25, and she was crying. My parents are engineers, she said, her voice shaking. I'm getting my MFA in poetry, and they've been telling me for 3 years that I'm wasting my time and money. They want me to quit and go to business school. I needed to hear someone say it's okay to disappoint them if it means not disappointing yourself. I took her hands and looked her in the eyes. It's more than okay. It's necessary. Your life belongs to you, not to their vision of what it should be. She nodded, tears still streaming, and I signed her book with a message I'd started including for readers who seemed to need it most. Your worth is not determined by their understanding. Keep creating. That summer also brought an unexpected reconciliation, though not the one I might have predicted. Vanessa, of all people, reached out in July. Not through Derek, not through my mother, but directly. She sent an email with the subject line, "I owe you an apology," and I almost deleted it without reading. But curiosity won out. The email was long and surprisingly honest. She wrote about how she'd been complicit in Derek's dismissal of my work, how she'd bought into the family narrative that I was the struggling sister who needed help. She admitted that when my success became public, her first reaction had been defensive because it made her question things about her own life and marriage. But she'd been doing a lot of thinking, she wrote, especially after reading my book, and she wanted me to know that she saw now how wrong she'd been. I sat with that email for 3 days before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit with her guilt the way I'd had to sit with their judgment for years. But another part of me recognized genuine remorse when I saw it. And that part won out. I wrote back a short message. Thank you for this. I appreciate you taking accountability. I'm not sure where we go from here, but I'm willing to get coffee sometime if you want to talk in person. We met 2 weeks later at a cafe in the Alberta Arts District, neutral territory far from family gathering spots. Vanessa looked different than she had at Thanksgiving, less polished somehow, more real. She'd stopped dyeing her hair, and the gray streaks made her look softer, more approachable. We ordered drinks and sat outside in the summer heat, and for a few minutes neither of us knew how to start. Finally, Vanessa spoke. I've been thinking about something you said at Thanksgiving. About how success doesn't just look one way. Derek and we've built this whole life around looking successful. The right house, the right cars, the right social circle. And somewhere in all of that, I forgot to ask myself if I was actually happy. I studied her face, looking for manipulation or an agenda, but I didn't see either. Just exhaustion. Are you happy? I asked. She laughed, but it was hollow. I don't know. I don't think I've let myself ask that question in years. We talked for 2 hours, and it wasn't about the intervention or even about my relationship with Derek. It was about the pressure of performing success, about how exhausting it is to maintain an image all the time, about the ways women especially are taught to measure their worth by external metrics. I found myself feeling something unexpected toward Vanessa. Not quite friendship, but understanding. She'd been playing the same game as Derek, just with different pieces. Before we left, she said something that surprised me. Derek's struggling with what happened. He won't admit it, but I can see it. He thought his whole life was exactly on track, and then you showed up with proof that success doesn't have to look like his version. It's been eating at him. I don't think he knows how to process being wrong about something so fundamental. I nodded slowly. That's something he's going to have to work through on his own. I'm not responsible for managing his feelings about my success. Vanessa smiled, sad but genuine. I know. I'm learning that too. Learning that I'm not responsible for managing everyone's comfort. Your book really did help with that. We parted with a tentative agreement to meet again, maybe in a few months. No promises but no animosity either. It felt like closing a circle I hadn't known was still open. August brought my 30th birthday, and I decided to celebrate it exactly the way I wanted. No big party, no family obligation, just a weekend trip to the coast with Sophia and Alex and a few other close friends. We rented a house in Cannon Beach, and spent 3 days hiking, cooking elaborate meals, playing games, and talking about everything and nothing. On my actual birthday, we built a bonfire on the beach as the sun set, and Sophia surprised me with a cake she'd somehow managed to keep hidden in the rental house all weekend. As I blew out the candles, she asked what I'd wished for. I'm not supposed to tell or it won't come true, I said. But then I told them anyway because these were people I trusted with my hopes. I wished for the courage to keep choosing myself even when it gets hard. Even when people I love don't understand. Even when it would be easier to go back to being small. Alex raised his beer. To Maya, who's never been small a day in her life, she just finally stopped pretending she was. We drank to that, and I felt something settle in my bones. This was 30. Not perfect, not without scars, but mine. Wholly and completely mine. My parents had asked about my birthday plans, and I told them honestly that I was going away with friends. My mother had sounded hurt. We'd like to take you to dinner when you get back, she'd said. We want to celebrate you. We did have that dinner, the week after I got back from the coast. They took me to a nice restaurant downtown, and my father gave me a card with a check inside. The amount made me blink. Maya, I know you don't need this, he said quickly. I know you're doing incredibly well. But I wanted to give you something anyway. Not because I think you're struggling, but because I want to support what you're building. Use it for your next course or your next book, or whatever project you're excited about. It was the first gift from my parents that didn't come with strings attached or implied criticism. I hugged them both, genuinely touched. Thank you. This means more than you know. My mother handed me a small wrapped box, her eyes bright with unshed tears. This isn't much, but I wanted you to have it. Inside was a delicate necklace, a small compass charm on a thin gold chain. For always finding your own way. The card read. Even when we tried to give you the wrong directions. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, Maya. Not because of your success, but because of your strength. I put it on right there at the table, and I wore it every day after that. Not because it was expensive or fancy, but because it represented something I'd been waiting my whole life to receive from my mother. Recognition. Respect. Pride that wasn't conditional on me fitting into her expectations. September brought the start of the academic year, and I began my regular guest lectures at Reed College. Dr. Wright had made it a standing invitation, and I loved working with her graduate students. They were hungry and ambitious and full of ideas that didn't fit into traditional frameworks, And I saw myself in every single one of them. During one class discussion about innovative therapeutic approaches, a student asked me how I'd dealt with family pushback when I was starting my business. The whole class went silent, waiting for my answer, and I realized they all needed to hear this. I told them the truth. Not a sanitized version, but the real story. The intervention, the years of dismissal, the decision to finally stop trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I wasn't enough. I told them about walking away and building a life that didn't require anyone's approval, but my own. When I finished, one student raised her hand. But don't you worry that you'll regret it? That you'll wish you'd tried harder to maintain those relationships? I considered the question seriously. Sometimes I admit it. Sometimes I wonder if there was a different way to handle it, a way that would have resulted in less pain all around. But then I remember that I tried for years to do it gently, quietly, without disruption. And it didn't work. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to be loud. Sometimes the only way to be seen is to stop making yourself small. The relationships I have with my family now are better than they were before, not because I compromised, but because I refused to. Another student spoke up. So you're saying we should just cut off anyone who doesn't support us? No, I said firmly. I'm saying you should set clear boundaries and enforce them. Some people will rise to meet those boundaries, and those relationships can be rebuilt on healthier ground. Other people won't, and you have to be prepared to let them go. It's not about punishment. It's about protection. October brought an opportunity one hadn't seen coming. A production company reached out about optioning my book for a limited series. They wanted to tell the story, fictionalized but based on the real events, of a woman who overhears her family planning an intervention and has to decide how to respond. The offer was generous, but more than the money, I was intrigued by the idea of my story reaching people who might not pick up a book, but would watch a show. I negotiated creative control, insisting on being involved in the writing process, and by the end of the month, we'd signed the deal. Sophia screamed when I told her, "Your life is becoming a TV show. How is this real?" I laughed. I don't know. 2 years ago I was sitting in a coffee shop overhearing my brother plan to humiliate me. Now I'm signing deals with streaming platforms. Life is weird. But the weirdest part wasn't the external success. It was how normal I'd become with it. The first few months after the acquisition, every new opportunity felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. Now it just felt like my life. This was what happened when you stopped waiting for permission and started building what you wanted. Opportunities appeared because you'd created the foundation for them. Success built on success. Not because you were special or lucky, but because you'd done the work and refused to apologize for the results. As Thanksgiving approached again, 2 years after the intervention, my mother called with a question. "I know you're probably planning another Friendsgiving on a beach somewhere," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "But I wanted to ask if you'd consider coming here this year. Just immediate family. You, me, your father, Derek, and Vanessa. No aunts or uncles or cousins. No pressure. Just the 5 of us trying to have a real Thanksgiving together." I was quiet for a long moment, genuinely considering it. 2 years ago I would have said no immediately, would have protected myself with distance and boundaries. But I'd grown since then. So had they. Maybe we were ready for this. "Okay," I said finally. "But I need you to promise me something. No PowerPoints." My mother laughed, really laughed, and it sounded like music. "I promise. No PowerPoints. No interventions. No commentary on anyone's life choices. Just family and food and hopefully some actual conversation." "Deal," I said. Thanksgiving that year was strange and tender, and occasionally awkward. Derek and I still didn't know how to talk to each other, so we stuck to safe topics like work and sports. But there was less tension than before, less of the competitive edge that used to define every interaction. Vanessa was warmer than she'd been in years, asking genuine questions about my speaking engagements and the TV deal. My parents were careful, almost overly so, making sure I felt included without putting me on the spot. At one point during dinner, my father cleared his throat. "I want to say something, if that's okay." We all turned to look at him. 2 years ago, we sat at this table and made one of the biggest mistakes we've ever made as a family. We planned to tear Maya down instead of building her up. We assumed failure instead of asking about success. And we almost lost her because of it. He looked directly at me. Maya, I'm grateful every day that you gave us another chance. That you didn't just write us off completely. You would have had every right to. But you stayed open to the possibility that we could change, and we're trying. We're really trying. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I know you are. And I'm grateful for that too. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. To growth, she said, raising her glass. To honesty. And to having the courage to rebuild instead of just pretending everything's fine. We all drank to that, and it felt like something shifted. Not a complete healing. Scars don't disappear just because you acknowledge them, but a commitment. A choice to keep trying even when it was hard. After dinner, Derek asked if he could talk to me privately. We went out to the back porch, the cold November air biting at our faces. I'm not good at this, he said without preamble. At apologizing. At admitting I was wrong. I know, I said. He nodded. I was threatened by you. By your independence, your creativity, your willingness to do things differently. Everything came easy to me, school and work and this whole path that was laid out. And you made your own path. And I didn't know how to handle that, so I diminished it. I diminished you. And I'm sorry. It was the most honest thing Derek had ever said to me. I don't need us to be best friends, I said carefully. But I would like us to be able to be in the same room without all this weight. Without the competition and the judgment. Derek smiled, small and tentative. I'd like that too. We went back inside to find Vanessa and my mother doing dishes together, talking and laughing about something. My father was putting away leftovers and humming tunelessly. It was so normal, so domestic, so far from the battlefield that Thanksgiving had been 2 years ago. And I realized this was what healing looked like. Not dramatic or perfect, just small moments of people trying to do better. December came and with it the usual holiday chaos. I was finishing up the final edits on my second book, this one about building a career that doesn't fit traditional molds, and preparing for a series of workshops I was leading in January. The TV show based on my story was in early development, and I'd had my first meeting with the writer's room. They were diverse and talented and genuinely interested in getting the emotional truth right, not just creating drama. I felt protective of my story, but also excited to see it take on new life through their interpretation. On Christmas Eve, I hosted my first holiday gathering in my loft. I invited my parents, Derek and Vanessa, Tyler and his wife, Sophia, Alex and his husband, and Dr. Wright. A blend of chosen family and blood family, all the people who mattered to me in different ways. I cooked for 2 days preparing, and the loft smelled like cinnamon and pine and possibility. As people arrived and mingled, I watched my parents talking to Sophia about her new job, watched Derek actually laughing at one of Alex's jokes, watched Tyler giving my mother a tour of the loft while she exclaimed over the windows and the exposed brick. This was what I'd wanted all along. Not to cut my family off completely, but to build a life so full and rich that their approval wasn't the only thing that mattered. To create space where all my people could coexist, where I didn't have to be a different version of myself for different audiences. Just me, whole and complete, surrounded by people who saw me clearly. Later that night, after most people had left and it was just me and Sophia cleaning up, she handed me a small wrapped box. I told myself I wasn't going to get you anything, she said. But then I saw this and I couldn't help myself. Inside was a keychain beautifully crafted, with a small engraved plate that read, "She believed she could, so she did. And when they said she couldn't, she did it anyway." I laughed and immediately added it to my keys, right next to the plain one from my loft. "This is perfect." Sophia hugged me tight. "I'm so proud of you, you know. Not for the book or the TV deal, or any of the external stuff. I'm proud of you for not giving up on yourself even when it would have been easier. For choosing your own peace over their comfort. For showing the rest of us that it's possible." We finished cleaning in comfortable silence, and after Sophia left, I stood at my windows looking out at the city. Portland was quiet on Christmas Eve, most people home with their families or chosen families, celebrating in whatever way felt right to them. I thought about that coffee shop conversation 2 years ago, overhearing Derek plan my intervention, and how completely it had changed the trajectory of my life. If I could go back and change it, would I? Would I choose a version of events where they never planned the intervention, where they just quietly continued underestimating me while I quietly continued proving them wrong? No. Because as painful as it was, that Thanksgiving had forced a reckoning that was long overdue. It had forced all of us to look honestly at our relationships and decide what we were willing to accept. And it had given me permission to finally, fully, choose myself. The new year came with its usual rush of resolutions and fresh starts. I wasn't big on resolutions typically, but I made myself one promise: to keep telling the truth even when it was uncomfortable. To keep setting boundaries even when people pushed back. To keep choosing myself first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. January brought the workshops I'd been planning, intensive 3-day sessions on building unconventional careers. People flew in from all over the country, and the energy in the room was electric. These were people who'd been told their dreams were impractical, their goals unrealistic, their paths too risky. And here they were anyway, investing in themselves, betting on their own potential. On the last day of the first workshop, during our closing circle, a participant named Marcus shared his story. He'd been a lawyer like Derek, successful by every traditional measure, and absolutely miserable. His family had celebrated every promotion, every milestone, never noticing that he was dying inside. He'd quit 6 months ago to pursue woodworking, and his family had staged an intervention almost identical to the one I'd experienced. "Your story gave me permission to walk away," he said to me. "To choose craft over career, joy over prestige. My parents still don't get it, but I'm okay now. I don't need them to get it." I looked around the circle at all these faces, people brave enough to choose themselves, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was the legacy I wanted to build. Not just my own success, but a permission structure for other people to pursue theirs. February brought Valentine's Day, and for the first time in years, I actually had someone to spend it with. His name was Nathan, a photographer I'd met at an art gallery opening. He'd been hired to document the event, and I'd been there supporting a friend whose paintings were featured. We'd started talking about the intersection of art and commerce, about how to maintain creative integrity while building sustainable businesses, and hadn't stopped talking for 3 hours. We'd been dating for 2 months, taking it slow, both of us cautious from past relationships that hadn't worked out. But there was something different about Nathan. He asked about my work with genuine curiosity, celebrated my wins without competing, and understood the importance of boundaries because he'd had to set his own with a family that didn't understand his career choice. On Valentine's night, we had dinner at my loft cooking together and laughing when the sauce burned because we got distracted talking. After dinner, as we sat on my couch with wine and the city lights spread out below us, Nathan asked me something no one had asked before. "Do you ever regret it? The way things went down with your family? Not rebuilding the relationship, but the specific way it happened. The public confrontation, the burned bridges." I thought about it, really thought about it. "Sometimes I wish it could have been gentler," I said honestly. "I wish there'd been a way to make them see me without having to torch everything first. But I don't think there was. I think sometimes you have to burn down the old structure before you can build something new." Nathan nodded. "I get that. My family still doesn't understand why I walked away from architecture to do photography. But I'm happier now than I've ever been. And that has to count for something." March brought my 31st birthday, and this year I did want a party. A big one. I rented out a gallery space and invited everyone, family and friends and colleagues and students and people who'd impacted my journey in ways big and small. Over 100 people showed up, and the walls were covered with photos from the last few years. Me speaking at conferences, teaching workshops, laughing with friends, living the life I'd built. My parents came and spent the whole night telling anyone who would listen about my book, my business, my upcoming TV show. It was almost comical, this complete reversal from people who'd once dismissed my work to people who couldn't stop bragging about it. But I let them have it because I understood now that their pride wasn't what I needed anymore. I was proud of myself. That was enough. Derek even made a toast, awkward but genuine, about how his little sister had taught him that success wasn't a single path, but a whole network of possibilities. Vanessa stood beside him, beaming, and I realized they looked happier than they had in years. Later, Vanessa pulled me aside. Derek started seeing a therapist, she told me quietly. After your book came out. He read it and it really messed with him in a good way. He's been working through a lot of stuff about competition and masculinity and what it means to be successful. I smiled. Good. I'm glad. She squeezed my arm. Thank you for not giving up on us completely. For leaving the door open even when we didn't deserve it. I didn't leave it open for you, I said honestly. I left it open for me. Because I didn't want to carry the weight of that anger forever. But I'm glad you walked through it. As spring turned to summer, life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Work was busy but not overwhelming. Relationships were deep but not demanding. I had space to create, space to rest, space to simply exist without constantly proving myself. The TV show went into production, and I visited the set a few times, watching actors bring my story to life in ways that were both familiar and strange. They'd changed names and details, fictionalized elements to create better drama, but the emotional core was intact. The scene where the protagonist confronts her family at Thanksgiving, that was almost word for word what had happened to me. Watching the actress deliver my lines, seeing the hurt and strength on her face, I cried. Not from pain but from recognition. That had been me. That was still me in some ways. But I'd grown so much from that moment. In July, I got an email that made me stop everything. It was from a university asking if I'd be interested in a visiting professor position teaching a course on entrepreneurship and creative business models. It was part-time, just one semester, but it was at a prestigious school, and it would give me a chance to work with students in a more sustained way than guest lectures allowed. I said yes immediately, then called Dr. Wright to get her advice on course design. She laughed when I told her the news. You're going to be amazing at this. You already are amazing at this. Just wait until you have a whole semester to really dig into the material with students. The fall semester started in September, and I loved it more than I'd anticipated. My students were brilliant and challenging and full of questions I didn't always have answers to. But that was the point. I wasn't there to give them a formula for success. I was there to help them discover their own. One student, a young woman named Priya, stayed after class one day. She was struggling with her parents' expectations, feeling torn between the stable career they wanted for her and the uncertain path she wanted for herself. I shared my story with her, the whole thing, and watched her face transform as she realized she wasn't alone. How did you know you were making the right choice? She asked. When you walked away from your family's expectations, how did you know you weren't just being stubborn or rebellious? I smiled. I didn't know. Not for sure. But I knew that staying small to make them comfortable was killing something essential in me. And I decided that my own aliveness mattered more than their comfort. Sometimes that's all you can know. That you have to choose yourself even when the outcome is uncertain. Priya nodded slowly. I think I needed to hear that. Thank you. Watching her walk out of the classroom, shoulders a little straighter than when she'd walked in, I felt that same rush of purpose I'd felt at the workshops. This was what mattered. Not the money or the recognition, or even the vindication of proving my family wrong. It was this. Helping other people find the courage to choose themselves. As Thanksgiving approached for the third time since the intervention, I realized I wasn't dreading it anymore. It had lost its power to hurt me. My family was coming to my place this year, another milestone in our rebuilt relationship. I was cooking, Sophia was helping, and Nathan was joining us for the first time. My parents had met him once before and approved, though I'd made it clear their approval wasn't required. Derek and Vanessa were bringing wine and dessert. Tyler and his wife were coming too, and Tyler had already texted 3 times asking if he could bring anything else, eager to help in that way he had. The day of Thanksgiving, my loft was full of warmth and noise and the smell of roasting turkey. My mother and Sophia bonded over their shared love of true crime podcasts. My father and Nathan discussed photography and light and the artistic process with genuine interest. Derek actually asked me about my teaching, wanted to know what I was learning from the students, and listened to my answer without trying to top it with his own experiences. Vanessa helped me make gravy and told me about the yoga teacher training she was doing, how it was helping her figure out who she was outside of being Derek's wife. We sat down to eat, all of us crowded around my dining table that wasn't quite big enough, knees bumping and elbows jostling, And it felt right. Imperfect but real. Before we ate, Tyler raised his glass. I know we usually go around and say what we're grateful for, and I want to go first. I'm grateful for Maya, for teaching all of us that family doesn't mean accepting whatever treatment you get. It means holding each other accountable to be better, to love better. My mother wiped her eyes. I'm grateful for second chances, and for a daughter strong enough to demand them. My father nodded. I'm grateful for being proven wrong, for learning that my way isn't the only way. Derek looked uncomfortable but sincere. I'm grateful for perspectives that challenge mine, for family members who refuse to stay in the boxes I put them in. Vanessa smiled at me across the table. I'm grateful for examples of women who choose themselves. It's harder than it looks and more necessary than I knew. Sophia, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand. I'm grateful for friends who become family. 4 chosen sisters who show up even when it's hard. Nathan, new to this family dynamic but reading the room perfectly, said simply, I'm grateful to be here. To be welcomed into this complicated, beautiful, honest family. And then it was my turn. I looked around the table at all these people, blood family and chosen family, people who'd hurt me and people who'd healed me, people I'd walked away from and people I'd walked toward. I'm grateful for the courage to burn it all down when it needed burning, and for the wisdom to know what was worth rebuilding from the ashes. I'm grateful for boundaries that protect instead of punish. And I'm grateful for every single person at this table who chose growth over comfort. We ate and talked and laughed, and there were no interventions, no PowerPoints, no carefully orchestrated plans to fix anyone. Just people being messy and honest and trying. Later, after everyone had left except Sophia who was staying over, we sat by the windows with the last of the wine. You did it, she said softly. You really did it. Built the life you wanted. Healed the relationships that could be healed. Let go of what couldn't. I leaned my head on her shoulder. We did it. All of us who decided we deserved better. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee, standing at my windows watching the sun rise over Portland. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Thank you for yesterday. For letting us be part of your life even after everything. We don't take it for granted. I smiled and texted back. Thank you for showing up. For doing the work. It matters. And it did matter. Not because I needed their validation anymore, but because I'd wanted to believe people could change if they chose to. My family had chosen to, however imperfectly, however slowly. That was enough. I thought about the girl I'd been 2 years ago, sitting in that coffee shop overhearing her family's plan to humiliate her. If I could talk to her now, I'd tell her that it was going to hurt worse before it got better. That she was going to have to make impossible choices and live with the consequences. That some relationships would break and not all of them would heal. But I'd also tell her that she was strong enough for all of it. That choosing herself wasn't selfish, it was survival. And that on the other side of that choice was a life so full and rich and authentically hers that she wouldn't recognize it. The keychain Sophia gave me hung on my keys next to the one from the loft. She believed she could, so she did. And when they said she couldn't, she did it anyway. I touched it like a talisman. A reminder of everything I'd overcome and everything I'd built. This was my story. Not the one my family tried to write for me. Not the one I'd accepted for too long, but the one I'd claimed for myself. A story of boundaries and courage, and choosing yourself even when it costs you everything. Especially when it costs you everything. Because sometimes the most expensive thing you can do is give yourself away for free. And I was done with clearance pricing on my own life. I was worth full price. I'd always been worth it. I just finally believed it. And that belief changed everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.